HIMS stock just broke through new all-time highs. It's up over 36% in the past week alone and over 50% in the past 7 trading days since I released my last HIMS video on Amazon entering the space. And if you remember, Amazon crushed the stock like 30 something percent, and we've gotten all those gains back. So, how are we back up so quickly? Well, there's two key pieces of news that will massively be beneficial for the company that I'll cover in this video. So, let's jump right in. Now, in my last video where the stock was down in the $19 range, I said I was buying heavily because I thought that we would bounce back fairly quickly. Now, the reason I said this was because HIMS is a very news sensitive stock, which is the exact term I used in that previous video. And I said that this would move up or down heavily depending on what the news was. Well, as it so happened, we had two very positive catalysts for the business in the past week. And these catalysts led to a very aggressive move upwards, pretty much reversing everything that we lost in that Amazon news on November 14th. So, why did the stock increase? Well, two reasons. Number one was the FDA ruling on terzepatide, which was delayed until December 19th. So, we've covered this in the past, but I'll very quickly recap. Essentially, the story here is that terzepatide is on shortage. And Eli Lilly essentially doesn't benefit from it being on shortage because if it's on shortage, it means that all of these other compounders can produce it, can sell it until that shortage is over. Who determines when that shortage is over? The FDA does. How does the FDA determine that? Well, it's supposed to be a status check across everybody who's producing it. But what they ended up doing was they ended up asking Eli Lilly. And Eli Lilly said, of course, that no, it's not going to be on shortage anymore. Here's our supply. Well, as it turns out, Eli Lilly might have been stockpiling some of that supply to make it seem as though the demand was not as strong as it was. Compounders immediately sued the FDA, and then the FDA went back to gather some more data. And the FDA was supposed to come back with their decision on whether tirzepatide remains on shortage or whether it's going to be off the shortage list. But they actually ended up delaying that decision. And this decision benefits him is because the longer that tirzepatide remains on shortage, the better that's going to be for a compounder like HIMS. And we know that it's going to come off shortage eventually, but for as long as that decision is pushed out, it's good, right? Now, the thing that I don't like about this entire scenario is how closely HIMS trades as a GLP-1 stock. Any news, positive or negative around GLP-1s, HIMS is going to be up or down drastically on that given day. And we know that HIMS is so much more than just a GLP-1 provider. So there will come a day where this thing will see a massive drawdown just for GLP-1s alone. But of course, now that catalyst is pushed out to December 11th, so we're going to see what the FDA decision is on December 11th. And there's basically three scenarios here. Number one is they push it out even further. Number two is they keep it on shortage. And number three is they take it off of shortage. And two of those are good for HIMS. If they push it out further or if they keep it on shortage, that's good for HIMS. And HIMS saw a good surge on this news, but really the reason why it jumped massively was the second piece of news that came out. And that was Trump's new pick for the FDA, Marty McCary. Now, I'll play a clip of them summarizing this on CNBC with the main points, but really the thing to keep in the back of your mind is that HIMS is a compounder for GLP-1 solutions. And when I play this clip, I just want you to listen to what this new FDA pick's background is.
Well, the IBB Biotech ETF seeing its best day since the election, with investors seemingly cheering on President-elect Trump's pick for FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty McCary. Telehealth provider HIMS and HERS also jumping more than 20% to an all-time high on this nomination. Angelica Peebles is here to explain. Angelica.
Yeah, Melissa, McCary is seen as the safe choice. Yes, he's been seen as critical of the FDA and some of the pandemic policies, but he's also a respected surgeon at Johns Hopkins, and he's seen as someone who supports science. And even though he did oppose COVID vaccine mandates and widespread use of boosters, he's not broadly against immunization. Moderna, Pfizer, and other vaccine makers that took a hit after RFK Jr.'s nomination for HHS secretary gaining today. And it's somewhat surprising to see those moves because Trump's pick to lead the CDC, physician and former Florida Congressman Dave Weldon, is much more skeptical of vaccines. Now, one area to watch will be how McCary approaches compounding of GLP-1s. Of course, that's if he's confirmed. McCary is the chief medical officer at Sesame. That's a telehealth company that sells compounded semaglutide, similar to companies like HIMS and LifeMD. The FDA hasn't been all that aggressive against this booming industry so far, and it looked like that would change once tirzepatide came off the shortage list. That's already a question mark. Remember, if with the FDA in court over that issue, and now potentially an ally at the FDA.
So I don't have to spell out for you in that clip how bullish this is for HIMS, because if you're a company like HIMS and HERS, which is a compounder, you really can't have a better pick than this individual, because all of a sudden you now have somebody in the FDA that will be a macro tailwind for that entire industry for other compounders from a GLP-1 perspective. And this was demonstrated in shares of HIMS and HERS rising 23% just yesterday on Monday. Now, I want to quickly cover some other pieces of news, mainly Bank of America, because Bank of America cut their price target by a huge amount, so much so that people even called for manipulation in terms of how aggressively they cut this price target. I made a post about it here. They cut their price target down from $32 to $18. And it's very reckless for analysts to do this, but even more so for people who are following blindly these analyst estimates because now HIMS is back to all time highs. And the second piece I found interesting, which came out yesterday on the back of this FDA pick, was this article on this company, Hunter Brook, which was short HIMS in June. And they, in fact, published a short report in June saying to sell the company and it's going down. They actually came out and now they're long on the company. And they said this hedge fund, Hunter Brook, is reversing their short decision and actually capitulating and going long. In fact, yesterday they even published a long report on this, why this company is going to be successful. And in the end, it just seems to me as though all of these price targets, hedge funds and institutions and analysts, they all flip flop from bearish to bullish. And it can all be justified by the most insignificant news to the point where it seems to me very much a trader mentality. Because in my mind, I imagine these hedge funds with these large teams of analysts that do the research and do the due diligence on the fundamentals of the company. And based on that, they have a stance that doesn't really fluctuate very heavily with every single piece of news. Whereas what we're seeing by contrast is that they completely flip flop on every single article that comes out. Because by contrast, for myself, when I do due diligence on a company, I usually have a range. And that goes from bearish to bullish in terms of I won't touch this company with a 100-foot pole or I'm going all in on this company. And essentially, the more that I read up and the more research that I do, it slowly pushes me to one direction or another. And that doesn't really change too much with every subsequent news article because I did my homework the first time around. When I'm forming that bull case, when Amazon news came out and the stock fell 30%, I wasn't flipping my price target to say, hey, sell out immediately. This is a horrible thing, because I was already strongly in the camp of being bullish based on everything that I'd read up until that point. And I knew Amazon was a risk. And so I started heavily buying that dip because I had conviction, because I had done the research underlying. And in the $19 to $20 range, even just a week ago, I started selling cash secured puts, which led to my very best ever week on options income. And I made a video about that. I was buying call options for both the January 2025 date and the January 2027 date, both of which are up triple digits. And I aggressively bought more shares of the company, which is now up 50% in a week. And so going back to those analysts, because I've done the homework and the research and I have slowly built up that conviction over time, I am very much firmly in one side of that spectrum. Whereas it seems to me that all of these analysts and hedge funds and media sources, they sort of sit in the middle. And every news article that comes out, if it's bullish, it sends them a little bit on one side. And if it's bearish, it sends them a little bit on the other side. And as a result, because they have no real conviction of their own, they flip flop consistently and they just follow the price around. And that is not conducive to a long-term investment mentality. It is much more conducive to like a day trader or a swing trader type of mentality. And as I was doing all of this, going super heavy into HIMS at $19 and $20 when it dropped, I was live tweeting, opening myself up to more scrutiny. And the reality is that you can't really buy conviction, regardless of what firms like Hunter Brooks say or what these analysts like Bank of America suggest you do. You have to do your own research. You have to form your own thesis, because at the end of the day, all you're going to be doing is chasing the stock up and down, depending on how it moves, and you will lose money that way. Now, what I'll say on HIMS specifically is that it is very volatile. It's not for the faint of heart. And I'll repeat what I said in my last video when it fell 35%. It is a very news sensitive stock. Even today, just before I hopped into this video, the stock was down 6% and now it's positive 1%. And probably by the time this is posted, it's going to be different than that. It's actually so volatile, in fact, that I'm not comfortable to write covered calls on HIMS because it could very easily pull a 20% move in a day for no real reason. Just look at the last 2 weeks, how it's moved, right? So now let's jump to what I suspect is going to be your most burning question. Where is the stock going to go from here? Well, most of the reason why we saw this surge up was GLP-1 related, with both the FDA decision and the FDA pick. And we know that that GLP-1 narrative will soon have to change over the next year because of these shortages that are coming to an end. And so I think that there could be some more short-term pain in the stock when those shortages ultimately end. Whether that's December 11th, if this FDA decision comes out negative, or whether that's in the new year, ultimately the shortages are going to end eventually. But what we know for sure by looking at the reports and also listening back to the earnings call is that this company is growing rapidly, even when you exclude GLP-1s. So they're going to be just fine. It's just going to be short-term headwinds because they're so closely associated with that GLP-1 narrative. But ultimately, the flip side of this is, I do think we're in price discovery mode for this company. Every single day, we see it breaking new all-time highs. And I think it's going to settle much higher because if you actually care to look at the underlying business, you'll realize that this company is very successful at what they're doing and compounding their growth incredibly quickly. As always, if you want to stay up to date with HIMS, I cover it on this channel consistently, as well as on the HIMS weekly podcast, which is at 6 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday. Join us later on this channel at 6 p.m. Tuesday to catch the show live. Thanks so much for listening. I will see you in the next one.